Behavior created a bunch of different games throughout their career. Dead by Daylight was obviously their lightning in a bottle, and despite what naysayers and burnt out players like to say, the game is not dying anytime soon. However, the company has created other original games and spin-offs, including Meet Your Maker, Naughty Bear back when Behavior was known as Artificial Mind and Movement Incorporated, the relatively recent release of The Casting of Frank Stone, and the infamous DbD dating simulator Hooked on You. 500 likes and I'll review this game despite my objections to playing it. I'm not into dating sims. Within all these titles, there's one game that's flown under the radar despite having a banner and a profile icon in DbD referencing it, but everyone's likely forgotten about it anyway, and if I'm going to be completely honest, I don't blame them. The game was not marketed very well, and there's not a whole lot of content in it in the grand scheme of things. This video will be covering and dissecting What the Fog, a roguelike platformer game loosely based on Dead by Daylight. Without any further ado, let's hop right in. What the Fog is a roguelike action platformer game where you take control as one of 3 DbD survivors: Dwight Fairfield, Claudette Morel, and unlockable character Fang Min, and clear a total of 15 rooms without dying to the multitude of entities trying to stop you. Like DbD, the method to the madness involves repairing generators, only this time you have to spend blood points to instantly repair them. These blood points can be found across the level in small amounts, but the main way to obtain them is from killing the endless amount of enemies that spawn around the level. After repairing all 5 generators, returning to the gate you spawned at will clear the room and you'll move on to the next one. And as you progress in the game, the amount of blood points needed to repair a generator will increase, so stockpiling them from killing enemies in earlier rooms is viable to gen rush the hell out of the future rooms. However, the longer you stay in the room, the more enemies will show up and the more dangerous they become, so you'll have to manage BP farming and doing gens in order to avoid becoming overwhelmed, especially in the later rooms and on the higher difficulties. Every 4th room will contain a resting area to heal up and obtain a small amount of BP. And this is because every 5th room is a boss level, which will require you to defeat a super juiced up version of a pre-existing enemy while the regular versions of that enemy will back them up until the boss is killed. This means you'll have to deal with a total of 9 regular rooms and 3 bosses to fully complete the run, and completing runs will unlock harder difficulty settings, elite enemy types, which we'll go over later in their section, and runes. What are runes, you might ask? Runes are basically upgrades that you can collect from completed generators that provide permanent buffs to your character throughout your run, and these buffs can range from faster movement speed, more damage, the ability to double jump and slow fall, trade max health in favor of increased damage or blood point gain, and more. Now that we've talked about how this game works and we're on the topic of runes, I think now would be a good time to talk about each individual playable character themselves, so let's talk about them. When initially booting up the game, you automatically start with Dwight and Claudette already available, while clearing your very first run will unlock Fang Min. All characters utilize an M1 as their primary attack, and M2 as their special ability, and Q as their secondary special. All characters can also use the shift button to dash in a direction of their choice, which is very handy for dodging, and trust me, you will be using this a lot on higher difficulties when the enemy count starts becoming insane. If you're on multiplayer, they also have a 3rd special and the ability to ping to other players about objectives or things of interest. But good luck getting a multiplayer game, this game's deader than the desert. As a result, I'm going to focus more on solo play here, so the extra ability will not be covered. Despite everyone having the same buttons, they all have unique roles they can fill. Starting with Dwight, his main attack is that he wields a staff that fires 3 energy bolts at a time at enemies. The damage on it is relatively low, but from my experiences, I think they can home in on enemies a little bit. Although I'm not going to 100% confirm if they do or not, I could very well be mistaking it for something else. Dwight's M2 is the ability to fire a slow-moving projectile that explodes and stuns enemies while doing a little bit of damage. This is especially useful for faster-moving enemies or more dangerous enemies like the bosses, the knocker moths, bull slugs, and surveyors. His Q ability is a little decoy he can toss out to divert enemy attention away for a little bit. This is handy as a get off me option for Dwight and his teammates, allowing you to have some breathing room in the event you're getting rolled. In between each room, all characters can get upgrades from their base kit abilities separate from the runes, and Dwight's involves increasing the numbers on his M2 and Q, and sacrificing health for more M1 shots. Overall, Dwight's a decent team support character, but in solo play, he's definitely the worst of the three since he has no way to heal himself outside of relying on the gen healing rune or the break rooms prior to boss fights. The second character, Claudette, is a bit more interesting than Dwight, and she has access to a crossbow with higher accuracy and very long range. Her M2 summons these little spiked ball creatures around her that cause enemies to become chilled for a limited time, slowing their movement. And this is useful for helping slow down weaker enemies like bull slugs or knocker moths and just being a decent crowd control option. Her Q summons a trampoline that shoves enemies away and allows Claudette to bounce on it 3 times base kit, which can be useful as an escape option if there's too many enemies, and it pairs very well with the rune that deals extra damage when you're airborne. Her upgrades include buffing the numbers of her abilities, summoning a passive minion to help deal extra damage, self-healing when you're sitting still, making her M1 stun and poison enemies respectively, and allowing her M1 arrows to split off and pierce enemies. Overall, Claudette has pretty good variety in her upgrade selection and is fairly decent once you get good with her, but she also comes with the lowest health of all the characters' base kits, so keep that in mind if you're using her, especially if solo. Finally, Feng Min is probably the best character in this game as her kit is pretty insane in comparison to everyone else's. Her M1 is a sword that deals decent damage, and just like your average late game Terraria sword, it has a projectile fly out of it that pierces multiple enemies by default. This already makes her pretty decent at shredding crowds, but her M2 is one big circular slash around her that deals massive damage to everyone within it. To top this off, Fang also has a group healing Q ability that creates a small pink spot on the ground, and anyone within it gets healing over time. Using Feng well can allow her to live for an insane amount of time, and comboing her kit with runes and her upgrades that can increase her numbers further and give her more damage, speed, and health from killing things makes Fang an absolute menace and a very strong choice on the higher difficulties. Overall, Fang likely has the best DPS in the game, and she's also very good as a team support due to her healing ability alone. Now that all the playable characters are done, let's talk about the things that can kill you, the enemies. The enemy variety is decent, but gets repetitive quickly since so many of them appear at once, especially later in the game. Starting us off, we have the Swarmers. These little guys roll around in numbers and try to ram into you. They lack health, but they're small and they don't move very fast. So they're pretty easy to kill, or even better, just ignore unless you need the blood points from them. Following them are Dicers, which are basically the main melee fodder of the game. When they get close, they spin an axe on their heads in circles and take off chunks of health, but they're slow and easily avoidable, so most of the time they're not a problem. What is a problem though are bull slugs, enemies that frequently and quickly charge in your direction and can deal a lot of damage while also pushing enemies around if they hit them. It's easy to lose track of them in crowds, so constantly jumping is a good way to avoid them, but they're dangerous if you don't see them coming. Following them are Spike Spitters, and they're the basic bitch ranged unit of the game that does exactly what the tin says. They spit spikes at you. Another ranged unit is the Belcher, an enemy that doesn't show up until mid-game that shoots buzzsaws at you. While they do move slower than Spike Spitters, they do a lot more damage and the projectiles can ricochet off walls, making them very dangerous if you're surrounded by geometry. Eruptors are large beefy units that shoot their own bomb heads at you to deal area of effect damage. Think of them like the Pokemon Blacephalon. They're typically support units who stick in the back, and since they have a lot of health and the bomb is relatively easy to avoid usually, they're not a priority enemy to kill unless you really need the blood points. Another support enemy to watch out for are the Custodians. These little disc-looking enemies can attach a shield to other enemies except themselves. This shield cannot be broken, making the unit invincible until the Custodian is killed first. I can confidently say that these guys suck on the higher difficulties and levels since they provide a lot of defensive backbone and they can be a pain in the ass to kill if there's multiple shielded enemies piled up to protect them. They don't suck as much as the final two enemies though, both being airborne. Starting with the lesser annoying one, the Surveyor teleports around to your general area and occasionally fires a projectile at you that can deal decent damage if they're not dodged. They like to group up with each other, which can make the game a literal bullet hell sometimes, especially when you pair them with the other flying enemy, the Knocker Moth. These guys are small and hard to hit while also dashing into you as their main attack, dealing good damage and shoving you around, which can make picking them off really annoying, and oftentimes they'll give the other enemies a chance to hit you as you're dealing with them. While the enemy variety is decent enough on its own, together they can synergize quite well, and it makes the game way harder depending on what enemies show up in the room you're in. This can be made worse once you start unlocking the elite enemies and they become a factor in the equation. Elite enemies are variants of previous enemies that begin showing up in your runs once you hit the achievement milestones of killing a certain number of specific enemies. There are 3 main ones, all of which are relatively self-explanatory. The poison variant will be colored green and they leave a poison cloud that deals damage over time after they're killed. The regeneration variant is colored purple and they'll slowly regain health over time if they're not killed, making them annoying if you don't go out of your way to kill that enemy, especially if they're enemies like custodians, knocker moths, surveyors, or eruptors. Finally, the chilling variant is an ice version that colors the enemy blue and gives them an icy aura that slows your character's movement speed if you're within its radius. Overall, the enemies and elite enemies get more difficult as you put more time into the game, but they're typical enemies you'd see in games like this. They don't really stand out that much besides how annoying knocker moths can be when you're being swarmed. What the Fog is a pretty forgotten game at this point, which I don't really blame since it wasn't advertised very well and the game itself is incredibly short. Once you've beaten the game once with every character, there's not really much of a reason to keep playing. The multiplayer isn't very active either thanks to the extremely low player count, so the game isn't really worth picking up in that regard unless you want to convince a friend to spend $5 to play with you. Overall, the game's okay, but I wouldn't go out of my way to recommend it. I just wanted to talk about it because I just think it's neat, and I also got the game for free back when it first released. If you want to see more content like this, feel free to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments what you think of What the Fog if you've played it, and with that in mind, cheers!